It is November 1987. You are sitting in your living room in Chicago just watching the late-night news.
Right.
The glow of a heavy cathode ray tube television is illuminating the room. It's a very specific analog atmosphere.
Oh, absolutely.
And suddenly the anchor just disappears. Your screen goes completely black, and then a man in a rubber grinning mask takes over your television.
Backed by this wall of screeching metallic static.
Exactly. For 90 seconds, an unknown phantom successfully hijacked the reality of millions of people. And to this day, no one knows who he was or, how he pulled off the impossible.
It is truly a staggering historical event.
It really is. I mean, before the internet revolutionized the way you consume information, before streaming services offered on-demand content, broadcast television was the ultimate centralized medium.
It was a monolithic one-way street of communication.
Right. If you were watching television, you were sharing a simultaneous synchronized experience with millions of other people across your entire metropolitan area.
There was an inherent trust in that system. You turned the dial, the picture arrived, and the authority of the broadcaster was absolute.
Our mission today is to conduct a comprehensive analysis of the most notorious, unsolved broadcast signal intrusion in American history. The November 1987 Max Headroom hijacking.
Yes.
We will be examining a stack of historical records, archival logs, and technical reports to understand exactly how two major Chicago television stations were overpowered by a phantom signal.
And we really need to look at the cultural context of the era, the precise timeline of the strikes, and the highly complex technical mechanics of the intrusion itself.
Along with the subsequent federal investigations, of course.
Exactly. It is essential to understand the sheer physical vulnerability of analog signals to fully grasp the magnitude of this event.
Because it's completely different from how things work today, right?
Entirely different. Unlike modern digital transmissions, which involve complex encoding and encryption keys, an analog broadcast is essentially a continuous wave of electromagnetic energy. And if you can generate a wave of the exact same frequency and deliver it with significantly greater electrical power to the receiving antenna.
The laws of physics basically just dictate that the stronger signal will simply overwrite the weaker one.
Precisely. What we are examining is an incredibly rare, perfectly executed exploitation of those physical laws.
And despite the actual intrusions lasting only a couple of minutes in total, this incident remains a complete masterclass in technological subversion.
It really does.
So, to understand why this event resonated so deeply and why it continues to be meticulously analyzed by technological researchers decades later, we have to establish the cultural backdrop of 1987.
We do. The mask is a crucial piece of this puzzle.
Right, because the intruders did not just cut the signal and broadcast empty static or like a test pattern. They chose a very specific face to present to the world.
They wore a mask of Max Headroom.
Now, for someone analyzing this event today, who might not be familiar with the pop culture landscape of the mid-1980s, who exactly was this character?
Well, Max Headroom was this fascinating cultural artifact. He was presented to the public as an artificial intelligence, a computer-generated television host.
From a British film, right?
Yes, originating from a British cyberpunk television movie called 20 Minutes into the Future.
Okay.
And the narrative premise of his origin was actually quite dark. Basically, a crusading investigative journalist named Edison Carter had been injured while uncovering extreme corporate corruption.
Right.
And his mind had been downloaded into a computer network. This process created a stuttering, glitchy, highly cynical digital entity.
So the character was initially designed as a sharp, biting, satirical critique of media conglomerates.
Exactly, a critique of television addiction and unchecked corporate greed.
So the character was essentially a warning about the dystopian future of corporate-controlled media. Yet, from what the historical records show, he became a massive commercial success within that exact same corporate structure.
Precisely. The satire was almost entirely co-opted by the very systems it was created to critique.
That is fascinating.
By 1987, Max Headroom had become a ubiquitous pop culture icon. I mean, he was given his own mainstream television show on an American network. He appeared in music videos.
And most notably, he was the centerpiece of a massive advertising campaign for the Coca-Cola Company.
Yes, he was specifically used to promote their new Coke formula with the slogan, "Catch the Wave."
Let us consider an analogy to help you visualize why the hijackers might have chosen this specific disguise.
Okay.
Imagine a highly sophisticated computer hacker breaching a major cable news network today, and when they appear on screen, they're using a hyper-realistic AI-generated avatar of a famous tech billionaire or a ubiquitous virtual influencer.
That is a very accurate comparison. Max Headroom was the 1980s equivalent of that concept.
Right, he was the ultimate symbol of a digitized corporate media landscape.
So by donning a cheap rubber Max Headroom mask, the hijacker was wrapping themselves in the very image of the corporate television structure they were actively violating.
It functions as an incredibly dense layer of irony. It really makes it the perfect thematic disguise for a broadcast pirate.
And that irony is compounded when you examine the geographical targets of this piracy.
The locations are incredibly important here.
They are. To execute a signal intrusion of this magnitude, an individual cannot simply broadcast from a suburban basement with a standard rooftop antenna.
No, absolutely not.
The hijackers specifically targeted two massive broadcast towers located in downtown Chicago.
Right, and at the time, these antennas were situated on top of two of the absolute tallest structures in the world.
The John Hancock Center and the Sears Tower.
Which is now known as the Willis Tower.
Yes.
The geography is absolutely vital to understanding the mechanics of this event. I mean, the John Hancock Center stands 100 stories tall. It's an immense black monolith on the Chicago skyline.
And the Sears Tower is even taller at 110 stories. It completely dominates the city's topography.
So television stations utilize the tallest structures available because analog broadcasting relies heavily on line of sight.
Exactly. The higher the transmission antenna is placed, the further the electromagnetic waves can travel unobstructed over the curvature of the Earth.
And over the surrounding urban environment, too.
Right, thereby reaching the maximum number of viewers.
When you understand that the target receivers for these television stations were located on top of these incredibly tall, highly visible structures, you begin to grasp the sheer scale of the hijack.
The perpetrators had to generate a signal powerful enough and aim it precisely enough to physically overwhelm the authorized transmissions hitting those specific elevated points in the skyline.
It requires a level of audacity and technical precision that remains astonishing when reviewed by broadcast engineers today.
It really does.
Let us break down the exact timeline of how this unfolded.
Okay.
The date is Sunday, November 2010th, 1987. The first strike occurs at precisely 9:14 in the evening.
Right.
You are at home, settling in for the night, perhaps preparing for the coming work week. You are tuned to WGN-TV, which is a major independent station in Chicago, watching the 9 o'clock news.
A very standard broadcast.
Yeah. Exactly. Dan Roan, the station's prominent sports anchor, is on screen delivering a routine report on that afternoon's Chicago Bears football game. It is a deeply familiar regional broadcast.
But at 9:14 p.m., the telemetry of that broadcast is abruptly severed.
The screens of tens of thousands of viewers across the Chicago metropolitan area go completely black.
And this blackout lasts for approximately 15 seconds.
Which is a long time.
In the context of live television broadcasting, 15 seconds of dead air is an eternity. It immediately indicates a severe disruption in the transmission chain to anyone monitoring the broadcast.
When the image finally returns to the screen, it is not Dan Roan.
No, it is not.
Instead, viewers are confronted with a highly unsettling visual. An unknown person appears, wearing the rubber Max Headroom mask and a pair of dark sunglasses.
And the individual is rocking and swaying erratically back and forth toward the camera.
Right, and behind them is a semi-rotating corrugated metal panel.
It is a low-budget practical effect, clearly designed to mimic the high-tech, rotating geometric lines that formed the background of the real Max Headroom broadcasts.
Crucially, during this first intrusion on WGN-TV, there is no audible speech whatsoever.
None. The audio feed is entirely dominated by a loud, staticky, garbled, buzzing sound.
It is an aggressive, abrasive noise that further contributes to the surreal and alarming nature of the interruption.
The entire intrusion goes on for about 30 seconds.
Just as viewers at home are trying to process what they're witnessing, the feed abruptly cuts back to the WGN news desk.
The brevity of this first incident was not due to the hijackers ending their transmission voluntarily, though.
No, it was the direct result of swift, decisive action by the WGN engineers who were on duty.
We need to detail exactly how they regained control of their signal, because it's important.
Yes, let's explain that. The engineers at WGN were monitoring the broadcast in real time for their control room.
Right. When the intrusion occurred, they recognized immediately that their studio-to-transmitter link, commonly referred to as the STL, was being actively overpowered.
And the STL is the highly focused microwave frequency used to beam the finalized television program from the physical broadcast studio to the massive transmission antenna located miles away on top of the John Hancock Center.
Exactly. The hijackers were blasting their pirate signal directly at the receiving dish on the Hancock Center using that exact STL frequency.
To counteract this aggressive override, the WGN engineers utilized a standard contingency protocol.
They manually changed the frequency of the signal linking their studio to the John Hancock Center transmitter.
So by shifting to an alternate secure microwave frequency, they effectively sidestepped the pirate broadcast.
That maneuver reestablished a secure lock with their transmission tower and returned their authorized feed to the viewing public,
leaving the hijackers broadcasting into the void on the original frequency. The aftermath of this first strike was captured live on air. Dan Roan, suddenly peering back on screen, maintained a remarkable degree of professional composure.
He really did.
He looked directly into the camera and stated, "Well, if you're wondering what's happened, so am I."
He casually attributed the bizarre interruption to a computer that took off and went wild before seamlessly returning to his sports report.
At this moment, to the general public and the station personnel, it appeared to be a fleeting, albeit highly unusual, technical glitch, or perhaps an internal prank.
However, the hijackers were far from finished.
No, they were not.
While WGN recovered quickly due to the presence of alert engineers actively managing the transmission link, the perpetrators simply waited for their next opportunity.
2 hours later, they struck again, executing a much more sustained and complex intrusion against a different target.
The timeline moves forward to 11:20 p.m. that same Sunday night.
The target this time is the local PBS member station, WTTW.
At this hour, the station is airing an episode of the long-running British science fiction series Doctor Who.
Specifically, they are broadcasting the serial titled Horror of Fang Rock.
The demographic watching a PBS station late on a Sunday night is generally a dedicated, attentive audience.
They were abruptly pulled from the narrative of the television show when the broadcast signal was once again hijacked.
The screens transition and the mask returns.
It is the exact same visual setup as before. The Max Headroom disguise, the sunglasses, the erratic swaying, and the rotating corrugated metal background.
But this time, the audio environment is entirely different. It is highly distorted and heavily modulated, but distinctly decipherable.
What follows is a bizarre 90-second transmission that we will break down in strict detail, examining the highly specific cultural references made by the masked figure.
The content of the transmission is disjointed, frantic, and delivered in a mocking, exaggerated cadence that makes the audio difficult to parse without careful analysis.
First, the figure makes a derisive comment calling WGN sportscaster Chuck Swirsky a frickin' liberal,
which is a highly localized reference. It demonstrates that the hijackers were intimately familiar with Chicago broadcast personalities.
because Swirsky was a prominent, well-known voice on Chicago radio and television.
Yeah, exactly. Singling him out suggests a specific awareness of the local media ecosystem, proving they were not just random external actors, but individuals paying close attention to Chicago media.
Following this localized insult, the figure holds up a can of Pepsi into the frame.
While holding the Pepsi, they loudly recite the slogan, "Catch the wave."
This is a direct, layered visual joke based on the corporate context we discussed earlier.
Right, because Catch the Wave was the heavily promoted slogan for Coca-Cola, the brand that prominently featured the actual Max Headroom character in their advertising.
So by holding a rival product, Pepsi, while reciting the Coke slogan in a Max Headroom mask, the hijacker is engaging in a deliberate inversion of corporate branding.
The transmission then shifts abruptly to another obscure media reference. The figure begins humming a distinct melody,
which audio researchers have identified as the theme song to the 1959 animated television series Clutch Cargo.
Following the humming, the individual clearly states, "I still see the X."
This reference requires a very specific knowledge of mid-century television animation. Clutch Cargo was known for a very specific, uncanny animation technique where real human lips were superimposed over static cartoon drawings to simulate speech.
The phrase, "I still see the X," is a direct reference to a visual anomaly in the final episode of that series.
Right. Over the years, due to the distorted audio of the hijack, this phrase was frequently misheard by viewers and investigators as "I stole CBS."
However, forensic audio analysis in the context of the humming confirms they are absolutely referencing the cartoon.
The individual then produces a knitted glove, places it on their hand, and observes that it is dirty, noting that their brother had the other one.
The monologue continues with the figure stating that they had made a giant masterpiece for all the greatest world newspaper nerds.
This is a precise linguistic inversion.
Yes. WGN, the target of their first attack earlier that evening, is an acronym that historically stands for World's Greatest Newspaper.
A slogan referencing the station's corporate ties to the Chicago Tribune.
By calling them the greatest world newspaper nerds, the hijacker is directly taunting the engineers and executives of the station they had previously compromised, linking the two events definitively.
And then, the final moments of the broadcast escalate in their sheer unpredictability and visual chaos.
They really do. The visual frame changes abruptly to a chaotic, surreal, physical display.
Right, an off-screen individual steps into the frame, and what follows are bizarre and surreal physical antics. It features chaotic visual props, including a fly swatter.
And this erratic, nonsensical behavior is accompanied by frantic shouting from the masked figure.
This bizarre sequence continues unabated until the pirate transmission abruptly cuts to static, and the broadcast seamlessly returns to the PBS programming of Doctor Who.
The entire sequence is jarring, confrontational, and deeply absurd.
It lasts for a full 90 seconds.
In the meticulously scheduled world of television broadcasting, 90 seconds is a monumental amount of time to lose control of your signal.
Which forces a critical question. When you analyze this event objectively, you have a team of individuals who possess the immense technical capability, the extensive logistical planning, and the sheer audacity to successfully hijack a major television signal in a massive metropolitan area.
They successfully conquered the airwaves.
Right. So why fill that incredibly precious, highly illegal airtime with nonsensical humming, Pepsi cans, and chaotic visual props like fly swatters instead of delivering a clear manifesto, a political statement, or a coherent demand?
That lack of a coherent message is perhaps the defining psychological characteristic of the event. It confounds traditional motives for piracy or terrorism.
There was no demand for ransom.
There was no political ideology espoused. There was no attempt to spread a coherent philosophical message or recruit followers.
The motive appears to have been the act of disruption itself.
The medium was the message. The sheer demonstration that they possessed the power to breach the unbreachable fortress of broadcast television was their entire statement.
The absurdity of the content only served to amplify the shock, confusion, and ultimate terror of the viewers and the authorities.
Because it implied a chaotic actor with immense power.
Wait, so during this entire 90-second ordeal, WTTW was completely helpless to stop it. We established that WGN managed to regain control in 30 seconds by simply changing their transmission frequency.
Yes.
Why was WTTW unable to execute the same contingency protocol?
The answer to that lies in the logistical realities of station staffing and infrastructure. WTTW Air Director Paul Rizzo and station spokesman Anders Yocom provided highly detailed accounts of the sheer panic in their control room.
The studio technicians monitoring the feed from the WTTW headquarters saw the intrusion happening live on their monitors, exactly as the viewers at home did.
However, their primary broadcast tower was not located at their studio. It was located miles away at the top of the Sears Tower.
Unlike WGN, which had engineers actively on duty at their Hancock Center transmission site who could physically intervene, WTTW operated with a different staffing model late on a Sunday night.
Right. There were no engineers physically present on duty at the top of the Sears Tower at 11:20 p.m.
Therefore, the technicians at the WTTW studio attempted to execute corrective measures remotely from their control consoles.
But they found themselves completely locked out of their own system. The pirate signal hitting the Sears Tower was so overwhelmingly strong that it effectively deafened the receiver to the studio's remote commands.
So without physical access to the transmitter hardware at the tower to manually shift the microwave link, they were effectively paralyzed.
They could only watch the bizarre spectacle unfold on their monitors, unable to regain control of their own station.
The WTTW broadcast only ended because the hijackers made the unilateral decision to turn off their own transmission equipment.
As Anders Yocom noted in the aftermath, by the time the station's personnel began actively investigating the technical parameters of the breach, the event was already over.
The hijackers vanished back into the static, leaving behind a profoundly bewildered audience and an unprecedented technical mystery.
To fully grasp the magnitude of this mystery, we must conduct a detailed examination of the technical mastery required to execute it. How exactly did they force the Sears Tower and the Hancock Center to broadcast their signal?
The underlying mechanism relies on a phenomenon in radio frequency engineering known as the capture effect.
Exactly.
Wait, so if I'm understanding this right, the tower does not mix the signals together into a blended static. Let us break down the capture effect so you can clearly understand the physics of this intrusion.
Well, when a television station broadcasts, it uses a microwave link to send its signal from the production studio to the main transmission tower.
And this microwave link operates on a very specific, unpublicized frequency. The receiving dish on the tower is tuned exclusively to listen to that exact frequency.
That is correct. The capture effect specifically occurs in frequency-modulated or FM signals. If two separate signals are transmitting on the exact same frequency and arrive at the same receiver simultaneously, the receiver does not combine them.
Right.
Instead, if one signal is sufficiently stronger than the other, typically by a margin of just a few decibels, the receiver will capture the stronger signal and completely reject the weaker one.
It effectively suppresses the weaker transmission entirely, locking onto the dominant wave.
Yes.
It is almost like, well, if the authorized broadcast is a person standing at a podium speaking into a microphone, the receiving tower is the audience listening.
A good analogy.
The hijacker did not just try to talk over the speaker from the back of the room. They drove up right next to the podium with a stadium-sized set of massive speakers and shouted on the exact same frequency, completely deafening the tower to the original speaker.
Exactly. Because the hijacker's volume was vastly superior, the audience, the receiving tower, only heard the hijacker. They forced the tower to broadcast their pirate signal instead of the authorized feed.
Yeah, that is a highly accurate way to visualize it.
While the concept of the capture effect is straightforward in theoretical physics, executing it against a major metropolitan television station requires staggering logistical capabilities.
First, it requires immense raw transmitting power.
The authorized studio-to-transmitter links used by WGN and WTTW are highly focused, powerful microwave beams designed to cut through atmospheric interference.
To overpower them and trigger the capture effect, the hijackers needed specialized, heavy-duty transmission equipment capable of generating an even stronger electromagnetic wave.
We are talking about tens of thousands of watts of effective radiated power.
Furthermore, they needed extensive technical expertise. They had to know the exact, unlisted microwave frequencies being used by the stations for their internal studio-to-transmitter links.
And these are not publicly broadcast frequencies. Discovering them requires active signal surveillance and specialized scanning equipment.
They also had to understand the physical alignment and polarization of the receiving dishes on the towers.
Crucially, they required a physical location with a direct, unobstructed line of sight to both the John Hancock Center and the Sears Tower.
Because microwave transmissions behave similarly to a beam of light, they do not bend around buildings or terrain. They travel in strictly straight lines.
Right. To hit the receiving dishes on top of those incredibly tall skyscrapers with enough power to trigger the capture effect, the hijackers likely had to position their massive transmission dish on a rooftop or an elevated vantage point somewhere in the dense urban geometry of downtown Chicago.
Or a very specific surrounding neighborhood with clear elevation.
Exactly.
Think about the sheer logistics here. You are calculating complex geometry to align the microwave beam. You are tapping into massive electrical power supplies, likely requiring heavy industrial generators to fuel the transmitter.
And you are doing all of this undetected right in the middle of downtown Chicago, moving bulky, highly suspicious equipment into an elevated position without drawing attention.
If we fast forward the history of broadcast technology to the modern era, we can understand why this event is a relic of the past, permanently isolated to the analog age.
When American television stations underwent the mandatory transition from analog to digital signals in 2009, the fundamental architecture of broadcasting changed entirely.
Digital signals utilize complex data encoding, packetized transmission, and cryptographic authentication protocols.
You cannot simply shout louder on a digital frequency to override a signal. The receiver will actively reject the unauthorized data packets because they lack the correct digital handshake and encryption keys.
Therefore, this specific type of brute force analog hijacking became virtually impossible. The 1987 incident represents the absolute zenith of analog signal piracy.
So you have two major stations compromised and millions of viewers baffled. Naturally, within hours, the federal government is knocking.
We move now to the investigation and the suspects. Who actually did this?
The Federal Communications Commission, the regulatory body governing all interstate radio and television communications in the United States, launched an immediate, high-priority criminal investigation.
The stakes from a legal perspective were incredibly high. Broadcasting a pirate signal over a licensed frequency is a severe violation of federal law.
At the time, officials from the FCC stated publicly that the perpetrators, if caught, faced a maximum fine of $100,000 and up to a year in federal prison for their actions.
The government viewed this not merely as a prank, but as a critical systemic breach of broadcast infrastructure security.
The FCC mobilized its Field Operations Bureau. They began analyzing the broadcast footprint, reviewing the archival footage of the intrusion frame by frame, and attempting to triangulate the possible origins of the pirate signal using direction-finding equipment.
But here's where you have to push back on the logistical realities of the investigation. Given everything we just discussed about the technical requirements, the massive transmitting equipment, the heavy power supply, and the absolute necessity of a direct, elevated line of sight to the absolute tallest buildings in Chicago, how is it physically possible that no one noticed a giant microwave dish pointed at the skyline from an apartment balcony, a rooftop, or the back of a large moving van?
That is the central paradox that has frustrated federal investigators and independent researchers for decades.
The equipment required is inherently not subtle.
A microwave dish capable of overpowering a commercial television link is large, heavy, and cumbersome.
Moving it, aiming it, providing it with sufficient electrical power, and operating it without drawing the attention of neighbors, building managers, or law enforcement in a densely populated city requires an astonishing level of operational security and physical stealth.
Because the perpetrators completely vanished without a trace, investigators and decades of historical researchers have formulated two prevailing theories regarding their identities.
We will lay these out impartially, examining the logic behind each.
The first theory is often referred to as the inside job.
This hypothesis suggests that the perpetrators were disgruntled, current, or former employees of a broadcast station.
Most likely WGN itself, given the specific taunts in the video.
This theory relies heavily on the premise that executing the hijack required deeply specialized insider knowledge that would be exceptionally difficult for an outsider to obtain.
An insider would know the precise, unlisted frequencies used for the studio links. They would know the exact orientation and technical specifications of the receiving dishes.
They would also know the internal scheduling and staffing models. They would know exactly when the engineers were least prepared, or, in the case of WTTW, late on a Sunday night, entirely absent from the transmission tower.
Furthermore, an insider might already have access to the highly expensive, restricted transmission hardware necessary to pull off the capture effect,
completely bypassing the need to source it illegally or build it from scratch.
The secondary theory points toward the hacker underground.
In the late 1980s, Chicago possessed a thriving, deeply interconnected underground community of hardware hackers, freaks, and pirate radio operators.
These were individuals who treated telecommunications infrastructure as a puzzle to be solved, manipulated, and ultimately conquered.
They possessed the advanced engineering acumen to build, modify, or repurpose surplus microwave equipment purchased from military or industrial liquidators.
The chaotic, highly ironic aesthetic of the broadcast heavily supports this theory.
The masks, the mocking references to local media figures, the deliberate absurdity of the physical actions, it all aligns perfectly with the anti-authoritarian, culture-jamming ethos of the 1980s hacker counterculture.
They were demonstrating dominance over a system they viewed as monolithic and rigid.
Both theories hold significant logical weight, yet neither has ever been definitively proven.
Despite the intense initial federal hunt involving multiple agencies and countless subsequent inquiries by journalists, historians, and technological researchers, the case went completely cold.
The legal window for prosecution eventually closed permanently. The statute of limitations for this specific federal communications crime is 5 years.
That window officially expired in 1992.
This means that even if the perpetrators stepped forward today, presented incontrovertible proof of their involvement, and detailed exactly how they orchestrated the event, they would face no criminal punishment whatsoever.
They are completely insulated from legal consequence.
And yet, despite the total removal of legal jeopardy, no one has ever credibly claimed responsibility.
In an era where individuals routinely seek notoriety for technological exploits and hacks, the absolute, enduring silence of the Max Headroom hijackers is remarkable.
They executed the most sophisticated analog broadcast intrusion in history and simply disappeared into the ether.
As we examine the long-term legacy of this event, we trace its historical record up to the present day.
The immediate cultural reaction in Chicago was a complex mixture of confusion and amusement. it immediately bled into popular culture.
For example, shortly after the intrusion, Mark Giangreco, a sports anchor for a different Chicago television station, WMAQ-TV, decided to incorporate the event into his own broadcast.
He humorously inserted clips of the actual hijacking into his sports highlights, reel to surprise his audience.
The result of Giangreco's comedic insertion was highly revealing of the public's psychological state of mind at the time.
WMAQ-TV switchboards immediately lit up with calls from deeply confused and panicked viewers who believed that their television station was actively being hacked again.
It demonstrated how profoundly the original event had unsettled the baseline trust in the security of the broadcast signal.
Over the ensuing decades, the enduring influence of the event has only grown.
Investigative and technological publications have extensively documented its lasting impact on media and cybersecurity culture.
The technology publication Motherboard explicitly categorizes this specific incident as an incredibly influential cyberpunk hacking trope.
It has become the foundational aesthetic for how unauthorized signal intrusions are portrayed in modern media, cementing the idea of the masked, static-laced disruptor.
You can see its footprint across various forms of popular culture. Television shows have directly referenced and parodied the event.
A prominent example is the animated series Space Ghost Coast to Coast.
In their third season, they aired an episode titled Freak Show. The premise of the episode involves a character named Commander Andy who constantly interrupts the television feed, directly spoofing the actions of the 1987 broadcast pirate.
To make the homage explicit to viewers, the episode even features a brief, actual clip of the original Max Headroom intrusion playing on a character's background monitor.
To truly understand its historical legacy, you have to place the event within the broader historical context of what sociologists and media theorists refer to as culture jamming and pirate television.
Culture jamming is the deliberate act of disrupting or subverting mainstream media institutions and corporate advertising to expose their underlying methods.
To mock their authority, or simply reclaim the public's attention for an alternative message.
The Max Headroom intrusion exists in the same historical vein as other notable acts of telecommunications defiance,
Such as the Captain Midnight broadcast signal intrusion.
In that 1986 incident, an individual successfully disrupted the HBO satellite feed to broadcast a text-based message protesting corporate scrambling policies and subscription fees.
However, the Captain Midnight incident had a clear, articulated grievance and a specific logical goal.
The Max Headroom intrusion remains entirely singular because it lacked any clear objective.
It was pure, unadulterated disruption for the sake of disruption.
It forces us to examine the psychological impact of having our centralized information streams compromised by an unknown entity with entirely unknowable motives.
When you look back at everything we have analyzed, the cultural significance of the corporate mask, the intricate timeline of the two distinct strikes, the overwhelming technical difficulty of achieving the capture effect over the Chicago skyline, and the absolute, unbroken silence of the perpetrators, it forms a historical narrative that continues to fascinate.
It is a story of analog vulnerability that feels completely alien in our modern digital landscape, yet deeply relevant to our anxieties about system security.
Consider this final thought. We live today in an era completely defined by digital insecurity.
We are constantly aware of remote cybersecurity breaches, massive data leaks, algorithmic manipulation, and the persistent, invisible threat of digital surveillance.
But there is something uniquely and deeply haunting about an analog phantom.
The individuals who executed the 1987 hijack did not steal financial data. They did not compromise personal identities.
And they did not shut down power grids from a server thousands of miles away.
What they stole, for exactly 2 minutes, was the collective, undivided attention of a major American city.
They hijacked the physical infrastructure of reality for thousands of people, bypassing massive corporate networks to deliver a bizarre message directly into their living rooms.
Leaving behind a surreal piece of performance art that remains perfectly anonymous nearly 4 decades later.
It is a profound reminder of the fragility of the systems we blindly trust to deliver our reality. When you turn on a screen today, the architecture delivering that image is vastly different, relying on packets of digital data rather than waves of analog energy. But the fundamental relationship remains exactly the same. You are receiving information, and you are assuming the source is who they claim to be. The history of the Max Headroom intrusion is a historical testament to the value of questioning the media structures around you, recognizing that even the most monolithic broadcast towers can, under the right circumstances, be forced to broadcast a completely different frequency. We set out to chronicle the most notorious broadcast signal intrusion in history, returning to that living room in 1987, where the centralized feed was broken, and the ultimate authority of the television dial was proven to be a vulnerable illusion. Thanks for listening.